I've been an adjunct part-time instructor for almost 33 years. I've been with the school district and the academy full-time since January this year as the advanced and specialized coordinator.
Okay, so almost 33 years as an instructor of what?
Firearms and defensive tactics and general subject matter.
What is a range master?
Range master is the lead firearms instructor that oversees the firearms program, coordinates the weapons section of that curriculum, make sure that the instructors that are working with him or her is certified, and basically oversees the program while they're on the range.
You ever been a range master?
Yes.
When?
I'm currently the range master and probably been so for probably since the mid-80s.
So you've been the lead firearms instructor since the mid-80s?
I've been a firearms instructor since about 1984. I took over as the range master or the lead probably mid-90s.
Do all basic recruits at a police academy in Florida follow the same curriculum?
Yes.
Who puts out that curriculum?
Florida Department of Law Enforcement under the Criminal Justice Standards and Training.
So while we're actually talking about the FDLE curriculum and your 32 years of teaching the curriculum, does it at any point state that blanks are an acceptable form of ammunition to use at role-playing?
It covers blanks in the curriculum and describes them as a training or used for noise. Also comes in that same curriculum and paragraph that it is a dangerous item and it should never be pointed at people.
Okay, so at no point it says role-playing exercises are acceptable?
Not that I've seen in the curriculum, no ma'am.
Now, you said that for almost 33 years you were part-time, and recently you're now full-time. What else did you do in your career?
I spent 34, almost 35 years with the Lee County Sheriff's Department.
And is it also commonly known as LCSO?
Yes.
Are you still employed there?
I'm an auxiliary status with them. I'm no longer employed with them.
What is auxiliary?
An auxiliary is, they're holding my certification. I'm still certified with the state of Florida, and in order to do so, you have to be connected with an agency. So I'm there as a auxiliary officer. Should they need my services, I would be available for them.
Okay. And how long have you been an auxiliary officer for?
Since my retirement in January of 2014.
So 34 years as a law enforcement officer, and then I guess since 2014 you have 3 additional years as an auxiliary officer?
Correct.
Okay. What was your rank when you retired?
Colonel in charge of law enforcement.
What did you do at the Lee County Sheriff's Office with firearms?
I had several roles over the years. Mid-80s, I believe 1988, or yes, 1988, I was selected as sergeant to form the first formalized training unit of the Sheriff's Department. I did that. At some point in time, I was put back into training as a captain to oversee the training unit. And then later on, as a bureau commander, training fell under my authority again.
So it seems like you've done a lot with training. Does that include training with firearms?
Yes.
What's your educational background?
I have an associate's degree in criminal justice. I have a bachelor's degree in business administration, and I have a master's degree in business administration with an emphasis in public administration.
I think you already answered this, but what year did you first become a firearms instructor?
I believe it was late 1984.
And To be a firearms instructor, do you have to be certified?
Yes.
Who certifies you?
Florida Department of Law Enforcement underneath the Criminal Justice Standards and Training.
Is there any kind of continuing certification to be a firearms instructor?
Yes, every 4 years you must recertify under Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
So if we previously heard testimony that there is no recertification necessary, would that be incorrect?
It would depend on what type of certification that particular person held, but in the state of Florida, in order to teach the basic curriculum at a police academy, you have to be certified underneath Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and their requirements is not only that you're a firearms instructor, but you also have to hold a general instructor certification as well.
What about being a firearms instructor with a department? Would they have to recertify?
If they're teaching a basic recruit type of curriculum and they're using the FDLE curriculum, yes.
What did it take for you to become a firearms instructor?
It was a written and hands-on class. At that time, it was presented through the academy. Captain Lou Gibbs from the Collier County Sheriff's Department was a range master at the time, and I believe at that time it was a 40-hour course to both prove your proficiency in shooting as well as a written examination.
Do you hold any specialized firearm certifications?
I'm a Glock armorer. I have been a Sig Sauer armorer, Remington shotgun armorer, and AR armorer.
Have you had any advanced firearm training courses?
Yes, I've been to several firearms courses throughout my career, both handgun, long gun, shotgun.
Anything specific, if you can remember?
Not by name, no.
Do you know Tom Lewis?
I do.
How do you know Tom Lewis?
Professionally through law enforcement, as my role with the Lee County Sheriff's Department and his role as an officer and then chief of police for Punta Gorda Police Department.
Your encounters with him always been pleasant?
Yes.
Has there ever been any hostility between you two?
No.
Do you remember any specific conversations over the years that you two have had about policy, procedure, agencies, anything like that?
No, everything pretty much has been in passing. How are you today? How's things with your agency? That type of thing.
Do you ever, or had you ever socialized outside of the law enforcement environment that you spoke of?
No.
Would you consider Tom Lewis a friend?
Yes.
Do you know Steve Russell?
I do.
Who is Steve Russell?
He is the state attorney for the 20th Judicial Circuit.
And does that mean he's the head prosecutor for this circuit, including Charlotte County?
Yes.
And how do you know him?
There again, professionally through my connections while I was employed with the Lee County Sheriff's Department and his role as the state attorney.
Did you always have pleasant encounters with him?
Yes.
Any hostility?
No,
Did you socialize outside of the law enforcement setting?
I have not.
Did you ever sit down with Steve Russell and talk about policies, procedures, or anything with the agency that sticks out to you?
Not that I recall.
Would you consider Steve Russell a friend?
Yes.
Are you concerned at all that your testimony here today could in any way be biased based on your friendship with Tom Lewis or Steve Russell?
No.
When a brand new cadet is going through the academy and they come to the firearms unit, what is the first thing that you cover?
Safety.
And have you ever participated in any kind of training where, regarding firearms, where safety wasn't covered?
Not that I can recall.
Is firearm safety something new that you teach, or has it always been involved?
It's always been something that's been taught.
What's the most important element of firearms training?
Safety.
Are there any general rules of firearm safety that FDLE requires you teach the new cadets?
There is a list of safety rules that is covered in the curriculum. Also, the academy that I teach for also has a list of safety rules as well.
Can you tell us just a few of those?
Some of the basics, all guns are always loaded. Never point a firearm at anything you do not wish to shoot. If you pick up a weapon, put down a weapon, hand it to another person, verify through a safety check that it's been cleared.
All the common sense kinds of things?
Yes.
Do cadets at first carry real firearms?
No.
What do they carry?
They're assigned, or at least through our academy, they're assigned a replica of a firearm. It's made out of some type of plastic or rubber compound. We have 3 different colors depending on the manufacturer that's used, but they're either blue, red, or orange. There are no moving parts on it. It's one solid casting that they carry in their holsters along with the rest of their duty belts so that they get used to wearing.
And we've heard testimony in the previous days about simunition weapons. Is this that you're speaking of different than a simunition weapon?
It is.
Do the cadets ever get to a point where they use firearms?
Yes.
When is that?
It depends on the curriculum, whether it's a corrections or law enforcement course. Right now, and it's changed over the years, but usually for law enforcement, they usually get exposed to the weapons sections somewhere about the 3rd or 4th week of their 770 hours of training.
And since you said corrections, what do you mean by corrections?
Corrections officers that are assigned as a patrol and custody of inmates. They work either in a prison setting or in a county jail facility.
So corrections officers as well have firearms training?
Yes.
When new cadets, I guess, go to the range for firearms training, are any safety checks performed?
Overruled.
So you can answer.
Okay.
Are any safety checks performed?
Yes.
Can you tell us about those?
A safety check is a term used by FDLE and our firearms instructors that anytime you handle a firearm, you pick it up, you put it down, you hand it to another person, you perform a safety check, which is a 2-phase operation. One, you're going to physically check the weapon to verify it's empty, as well as visually check to verify that that weapon is empty.
And when you were the range master of LCSO, were there also safety procedures in place?
Yes.
Same kind of thing or something different?
Yes.
What is the minimum amount of people that should check a firearm?
There's no set rule or law that would govern that, but standard practice would be at least 2 different people.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, how many people?
At least 2.
I want to turn to August 9th, 2016. Did you have any involvement in the events at the Punta Gorda Police Department?
No, I did not.
Are you familiar with the events?
I am.
And are you familiar with the shoot, don't shoot scenario?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you reviewed what's known as the discovery in this case?
I have.
And have you reviewed the photographs and videos?
I did.
Evidence?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. For what purpose?
To be able to testify here today.
Was the video that you viewed the video of the shoot, don't shoot scenario?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge.
And who was present in that video?
There were the victim, several officers from Fort Myers Police, or I'm sorry, Punta Gorda Police Department. people, civilians that were part of the group going through that course that night, and I'm not sure who else may have been in there.
What weapons were being used?
That I could see was a revolver, appeared to be a 2-inch revolver, either, I'm sorry, nickel-plated. It appeared to be nickel-plated.
And what about Mary Knowlton, the female? Did she have any type of weapon?
In the video itself, I did not recognize a weapon at that point in time. In the pictures, she was armed with a semi-munitions weapon.
Did it cause you, or did you have any observations about the fact that a role-play scenario was being done with these two different weapons?
You may. Overruled.
Okay. Your question again, I'm sorry.
Did you have any type of observations about this role-play scenario with these two weapons being used?
I did.
What were those observations?
My first observation was it was a scenario involving people, and there was a real or live firing weapon involved in that scenario.
And did that cause you any concern?
Yes.
And why is that?
Because you're using a weapon, or a weapon was being utilized that is allowed to fire a live round of ammunition.
Did you make any observations about possible safety gear that the officer had, Officer Lee Cole?
It appeared that Officer Cole had some safety equipment on, designed to be utilized with semi-munitions rounds. Had a helmet with face shield on it. Appeared to have a long sleeve shirt or sweatshirt on, which would protect body and arms. I did not notice any gloves that he may have had on, which is sometimes common to be worn, there again, to protect the hands.
In semi-munition training, is it common to have some kind of protection?
Yes.
And why is that?
The semi-munition round fires a projectile made of, depends on the manufacturer, but in this particular case, it's a soap type ingredient encapsulated into a plastic capsule, and when you're hit with it, it will leave a mark, or at certain distances it can leave a welt or even cause possible lacerations. So the protective gear is designed to be worn to be able to protect against that.
Did you observe if Mary Knowlton was wearing any protective gear?
I did not.
Did that cause you any concern?
It did.
What about, did you make any observations regarding the distance of the people that were watching the scenario?
It was difficult to determine an actual footage, but it appeared that they were.
Sustained.
In your experience, when you're dealing with crowds watching a scenario play out, do you take into consideration the distance that they need to be away from the scenario?
Yes.
Why?
For safety reasons, so that regardless of what type of weapon we may be using, semi-munitions, plastic guns, whatever it may be, that they're not in harm's way, that they're close enough that they can see what's going on, but they're in a position so that if there was, for instance, a semi-munitions round fired, that it wouldn't be in their field of fire.
Are you familiar with blank ammunition?
I am.
Okay, and what is blank ammunition?
Blank ammunition round is it's a round of ammunition that is consistent of a casing, a primer, powder, and has no projectile in it, and it's encapsulized inside that casing, and then the end of it is sealed so that the gunpowder doesn't fall out.
And what's the main effect that blank ammunition is supposed to have?
The main issue is to be able to provide a noise level,
So a loud sound?
yes, to duplicate, gunfire.
Are there any safety concerns involved with blank ammunition?
Yes,
And why is that?
because a blank round can cause injury or including death, depending on how it may be used and how it's fired.
Maybe deadly?
Yes,
And through your experience, do boxes of blank ammunition carry warnings on them?
they do.
Is that for the reasons you just stated?
Yes.
All right. Through your experience and training, do you have any reservations or concerns with using a real firearm and blank ammunition?
I do.
Okay, why?
There again, when you fire a blank round, even though there's not a projectile coming out of that casing, because it is under pressure, when the primer is ignited and ignites the gunpowder that's inside that casing, it's designed to build up a lot of pressure, a lot of energy to be able to drive a bullet, or in this case, a wadding forward and out of that gun. So there's a lot of energy being expelled out the end of the barrel. Unspent powder, gases from that, and they're at close range can cause injury to a person, or if it's close enough, even death.
Do you have to take into consideration, or do you take into consideration, that although it is a blank ammunition, the firearm being used is capable of shooting live ammunition?
Yes.
When using blank ammunition, do the same rules of firearm safety come into play?
Yes.
All the same rules apply?
As far as I'm concerned, yes.
When, in a scenario like this, you had a citizen or a civilian involved, would you want to know what kind of firearms experience the person had?
Yes.
Why?
Well, I'm putting them into a situation that we're using firearms, whether they've had any experience with firearms, are they susceptible to loud noise, are they easily startled, do they have any medical conditions. If I had my choice out of a group, I would try to select somebody that maybe had some firearms experience, so that they're comfortable with handling that firearm.
What's a handler?
I'm not sure what you're referring
A
to.
handler in the sense that a civilian like this, and let's say they had no firearms experience, would you want a handler to be with them?
Referring to that, I would assign, in a scenario situation, a certified firearms instructor to be in close proximity to that person. So at some point in time they felt uncomfortable or became anxious or panicked in some way, that the instructor could step in and prevent any further action from that person.
Okay, and would you want to take that action even though just a simunition weapon was being used?
Yes.
And how close would a handler, or how close would you want a handler to be in order to control the scenario if something does go wrong?
Counsel approach. You may proceed.
Based on your training and experience, how close would you want a firearms handler to be?
Okay, overruled.
Within just a few feet of that person, so that if something were to transpire, that I could reach in or whoever was assigned to do that, reach in and stop any further action from happening.
From your training and experience and your review of the evidence in this case, being the video, is there any concerns that that occur when somebody is pointing a firearm in the direction or near somebody?
It's always a concern when somebody's pointing a firearm at another person.
Okay. Even if they're not pointing directly at them?
Yes, because there again, what transpired just seconds before that, what transpired just seconds after that, it doesn't take but a split second to move the direction of a firearm muzzle.
And through your training and experience, can ammunition ricochet off of things and go in different directions?
Yes.
What about cars?
Yes.
Are you familiar with wad cutters?
Yes.
What are wad cutters?
A wad cutter is a round of ammunition that was originally designed probably 70s, maybe early 80s when I became familiar with them. They were used in revolvers, mostly for shooters that were in competition, shooting paper targets. Reason for that, a wad cutter is flush on the very end of it, and when it hits a paper target, it punches a very clean hole, makes almost a perfect circle. So when you're shooting a 60-round course or larger course than that, and you have a very tight pattern, it was easy for the scorers of those targets to score that target and tell how many they had in the X ring or 9 ring or whatever. A wad cutter is it's a regular round of ammunition, shoots most of the time a lead projectile. The difference is when a bullet or projectile is seated into the casing, what you normally see sticking out the end of the casing, there's almost that much seated inside the casing that you don't see. On a wad cutter, there's nothing sticking out the front of it. It's all encased into the casing itself. So it's flush on the end of the casing, therefore being able to punch that solid hole.
Okay, we'll get more into that. What kind of firearm are wad cutters more so associated with?
I'm familiar with them being fired from revolvers.
And does law enforcement today carry revolvers?
There are some law enforcement officers still carrying revolvers. Most agencies that issue firearms are carrying semi-automatic, but revolvers are still being used by some officers, off-duty, secondary weapon, even some primary weapons.
Do canine officers use revolvers?
They can, yes.
Are wad cutters currently part of the curriculum for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Academy?
A wad cutter is no longer in the current curriculum. It has been in the past curriculums.
They're no longer even covered?
No.
Now, did you have a chance to look at the blank ammunition in this case as well as the wad cutter?
I did.
Your Honor, may I approach the clerk?
You may.
Were you able to view multiple kinds of ammunition associated in this case?
Yes, I was.
let's take a look at State's Exhibit 65. Can you tell what those are?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what is that?
They are 38 special blank rounds.
Okay, and on State 64, is this a picture of the box on the outside?
That is a box of 38 special blank rounds.
And it clearly says blank on it, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you familiar with blazers, which is in 102?
I'm familiar with manufacturer, yes, ma'am.
And on this box, do you see the word blank on it?
No, ma'am.
And then the third box, State 68, are Yoshi. Are you familiar with that brand?
I'm familiar with the brand, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and different side of State 60, this is State 69, you see the word blank on that.
I do.
Okay, so you did see the word blank on the blazers. What conclusion do you make from that?
Based on the picture, it was a box of ammunition made by Blazer, but without seeing the end of the box, I can't tell you what was in it.
State 98 are the three boxes we just discussed, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now I may approach the witness.
You may.
First at State Composite 128. Are you familiar with these?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and what is State 128?
These are 38 special blank rounds made by Winchester.
And if you would open the box, please. And if you would pull one up and just show the jury. And what color casing is that?
It's a brass casing.
By looking at that, can you tell what kind of ammunition that is?
Yes, ma'am.
How?
I can look at the open end of the projectile at this end here and tell that it has a cardboard insert into it and no projectile.
So you can clearly tell that that is blank.
Yes, ma'am.
Moving on to State 122, if you just want to set these aside for a moment. Now, are you familiar with State 122?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what are those?
These are 38 special 148 grain wad cutters made by CCI Laser.
And can you explain to the jury the difference just between the boxes, the shapes of the boxes?
This is a rectangular box, most commonly used as packaging for live ammo. It has and I believe in this one, a plastic tray where the rounds of ammunition are put nose down in this tray,
Actually take it out.
individually separated. These are aluminum casings.
Now, looking at that, are you able to identify what that ammunition is?
I am.
How?
By looking there again at the open end of the casing, I can see a lead projectile.
Okay. And you said the Winchesters had what on the end? I'm sorry.
In this particular case, these had a cardboard wadding inside of them.
Okay, and are cardboard waddings always used in blanks?
No, it could be a cardboard wadding. It could be some type of waxy disc. It's designed to keep that powder charge inside so that when you held it upside down, it didn't fall out.
And is there any noticeable difference in the weight of the two?
Yes, the blank round is slightly lighter in weight than the wad cutter would be.
And why is that?
They're basically made up of the same components, except the wad cutter has a lead projectile which has weight to it, where the blank round does not have.
Your Honor, I would like to publish to the jury. I would like to be able to feel both of them and look at both of them.
You may.
And just to reiterate, the aluminum colored one would be the wad cutter with the projectile, and the brass one is the blank?
That's correct.
And that states 112 photograph.
May continue to inquire.
Mr. Simpson, looking at state 112, do they appear similar in size?
Yes.
State 113 is a view kind of from the top. Looking at the Winchester, the blank one in the middle, can you clearly see the cardboard wadding you were speaking of?
I can.
Okay, and then on the right, where the blazer is, can you clearly see the projectile?
I can.
Would it be uncommon for someone to be able to identify wad cutters?
Sustained.
What's a safety officer?
A safety officer is, and the way we use a safety officer, is a certified firearms instructor that works the line under the direction of the firearms and range master to oversee the safety that is going on at the time that an event is happening, whether it's a line of officers that are shooting all down at the target line at the same time, certain ratio of safety officers or instructors to student ratio, or if it's a scenario type situation, we put more range officers because there's movement involved, that type of thing.
Okay, And I think you said events, does that all, in trainings, does it also cover things like demonstrations?
Yes,
Okay, what about role-playing scenarios?
yes.
When designating somebody as a safety officer in your training and experience, would you want somebody that could identify the difference between the wad cutters and the blanks?
Yes,
Would you, in your training and experience, expect them to specifically know that they're looking at a wad cutter?
Sustained.
Okay. In order to have a qualified safety officer, through your training and experience, should it be somebody who can identify different ammunition?
Sustained.
Can you approach, Your Honor?
No?
Did LCSO or the Lee County Sheriff's Office ever use citizens in any kind of firearm event or demonstration?
Approach.
After reviewing the video and photograph and all the discovery, were you able to, would you say that Tom Lewis took an active role or a passive role?
Pardon me? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. In reviewing the video, you just repeat the question, please.
After reviewing the discovery.
I'm sorry.
Active role, passive role, what would you say?
I would believe he took an active role.
Okay, and after looking at the information provided in the case, as well as the discovery, in your training and experience, is it your opinion that the events of August 9th of 2016 in the shoot-don't-shoot scenario were in conformity with proper procedures and protocols?
Opinion, ultimate fact, the jury, investigation.
For safety?
Sustained as to the form.
Did you, after reviewing all the evidence, did you make a determination as to whether or not you thought the events in the shoot-don't-shoot scenario were performed safely?
Overruled.
I had, after watching the video and the pictures, had safety concerns as to how it was performed.
Right, and what were those safety concerns?
There was the fact that there was a live firearm involved in the scenario, the placement of the spectators in that scenario, and the distance from the scenario to the observers.
Okay, and what about the absence of any protective gear for Mary Nolan? Did that cause you any concern?
It did, only in the fact that she had no protective gear on at all, and there was a live firearm being used.
And through your training and experience, under what circumstances would it be appropriate to allow or sanction the use of a real firearm, regardless of what's in it, in a shoot, don't shoot type of scenario?
Never.
One moment, Your Honor.
You may.
No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Good morning.
Okay. Let's start off first with the testimony you gave about the FDLE curriculum. The FDLE curriculum that you're speaking of, would you agree with me, changes year to year?
Correct.
So the reference to it that you're doing is a reference to it of which particular time frame?
The time frame I was speaking of and was given information on was from 2011.
2011 forward.
No, the curriculum was for the year 2011.
Okay. So the curriculum that you reviewed and testified here today was 5 years before the event that we're talking about here, correct?
In that particular chapter, yes.
Okay. And did you review the firearms instructor manual that FDLE puts out also, that lists things about blanks and role playing? Did you review that?
I'm not sure what you're referring to as far as, I'm familiar with the curriculum that FDLE puts out for high liability training.
Okay, so the curriculum's kind of a broad term, you agree with me, right?
Yes.
Okay, so within curriculum, there's different things within there, like what you can be educated on that FDLE might put out, correct?
Yes.
Are you familiar with there's a firearms instructor manual?
There are several firearms instructor manuals.
Okay, did you review the firearms instructor manuals as to the use of blanks in relation to your testimony on role playing?
I reviewed the FDLE high liability chapter 3 curriculum book.
When you refer to there's a lot of firearms instructor manuals, okay?
Sure.
You know what you're talking about when you tell me that, correct?
The NLRA puts out manuals, FDLE puts out manuals, a lot of different organizations put out firearms training manuals.
So the firearms training manuals that are put out, did you review those in relation to this case? Let's start with FDLE's.
Yes.
Okay, and that's the one you're saying from 2011.
Correct.
Did you review any other firearms training manuals that address blanks and role playing in any capacity?
I've reviewed 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 17 is coming out July 1st. I have not visually seen it yet.
So it's your testimony then that there is no firearms instructor manual that addresses blanks with role playing. Is that correct?
That I have seen? No.
That you have seen. So you qualified based on what you know today, correct?
Yes.
Now, you've never been qualified before in court as an expert in firearms, correct?
No, sir.
I'm correct with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You've never been qualified before as an expert in firearm ammunition, correct?
Correct.
You've never been qualified in the court as an expert in firearm training, correct?
Correct.
You've been qualified as an expert in court before in firearm safety, correct?
Correct.
You never testified as an expert in any of above those fields before, correct?
Correct.
So today's the first day, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, your training as a firearms instructor permits you to teach people things that you're taught, correct?
Yes.
And you haven't done any type of specialized training as to, let's say, ammunitions as far as weights and grades and things of that nature, correct?
No specific course, no, sir.
Okay. And you haven't done any other specialized training beyond what any other firearms instructor would get through FDLE, correct?
Incorrect.
Okay. You've done the same training that any other firearms instructor would have done through FDLE. Let's start there.
Yes.
Okay. You've done some other courses through the years where people who are firearms instructors get to go to classes somewhere, right?
Correct.
And those things are, tell me if this is right, a hotel or something has a seminar about, something new in firearms use or training or something, correct?
Partially, yes.
Okay. Some of them are in-house, correct?
In-house, yes.
Okay. These are all things that are available to any particular firearms instructor if they choose to go to them, correct?
Correct.
Beyond that, any other specialized training outside of either FDLE, what your department sends you to, what courses you take, anything like that?
No.
So any firearms instructor can have the same type of training that you have, correct?
If they choose to do so, yes.
Okay. So your degrees that you talked about, that you have, the degrees that you have an associate's in criminal justice, correct?
Yes, sir.
And what year was that?
90, 91, I believe.
And what school was that from?
Edison Community College?
Okay. You have a bachelor's in business administration, correct?
Yes.
That's a 4-year degree, right?
Yes.
Did that 4-year degree involve any type of training about firearms at all?
No.
You have a master's degree in business administration, correct?
Correct.
And that's a 1 or 2-year degree?
2-year.
2-year degree. And did you have any training in that, any instruction in that about firearms instruction beyond what you normally get through FDLE or courses?
No, sir.
And your bachelor's is from where?
Officially, it's from International College. Now it's known as Hodges University.
Where's that?
Fort Myers, I believe their main campus is in Naples.
Okay. And the business administration master's?
From Impact University, which was here in Charlotte County.
Does that university still exist?
No, sir.
You were contacted by the state around April of 2017 to become involved in this case, correct?
That sounds about right, yes, sir.
And that was after charges had been filed against Chief Lewis, correct?
Yes.
And had you seen in between February and April any information on TV, news, media, had heard about what this case was about?
Just what was presented on the news, yes.
Okay. And so you read and heard those things, correct? Is that a yes?
Yes.
You were not a witness to that in Punta Gorda, right?
No, sir.
FDLE never consulted you in their investigation from August until whenever they ended it, correct?
No, sir.
They did not.
No, sir.
You did not have any investigative relation to this case in any manner, correct?
Correct.
You didn't go out to the scene, correct?
No, sir.
You didn't go do any type of measurements there, correct?
No, sir.
You didn't go interview any witnesses?
No, sir.
Now, you testified earlier, you said you were friends with Tom Lewis and friends with Steve Ruster. That's not fully accurate as to the level of relationship you have with those two men, is it?
Don't understand your question.
Let's clarify the term friend. You and I, we've talked in a deposition before, right?
Yes, sir.
We were friendly in that, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I saw you out here yesterday before, and we said hello, and
Yes.
friendly in that? Okay. So if somebody said, you know me, you'd be able to tell them, I know Mr. Roman. Like I'd be able to say, I know Mr. Sims.
Correct.
Whether somebody said we're friends or not, kind of puts it in kind of another type of view, right?
Correct.
Okay, we've just met professionally.
Correct.
So let's talk about then your testimony that you know both of these people. Tom Lewis, you never worked with him in the agency, correct?
No, sir.
You never did a case with this man, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. And you knew him through basically two organizations that you both were involved in, right?
Yes.
One of them was a police chief association in which he was the president and you were a member, correct?
Correct.
The other one was, I believe, the Regional 10 Training Council, like a group you guys sat on together?
Yes, sir.
And those councils don't require attendance every time or something. It's, members come and go type of thing, right?
Correct.
You might have seen him then, in the course of this, would it be fair to say, about 10 times.
10 or more, yes.
Okay. And all of those then were in relation to the things we just talked about, correct?
Yes,
And much like when you would run into me in the hall and I said to you, nice to see you, and shook hands and all that, same thing with Tom Lewis, right?
I would say it would be more than that, only because I just met you officially yesterday and put a face with a name. Chief Lewis, I've known and seen and talked to many, many times over the years.
Well, we're talking about maybe a dozen times at most.
Okay, yes,
Agree on that?
I'll go with that number.
Okay, so now let's go to Steve Russell, who's the elected state attorney, right?
Okay.
Now, Steve Russell is the boss of the two prosecutors that are here, correct?
Yes,
And you know that Mr. Russell's office he's over the 20th Judicial Circuit, right?
yes, sir.
And that circuit encompasses many counties, correct?
Yes,
One of the counties it encompasses is the Charlotte County, where we are now, right?
correct.
It's his, I guess, northernmost county he has, right?
Yes, sir.
State Attorney Ed Brodsky has the next county up, which I believe is in
Objection
Sarasota.
relevant.
Sustained.
This is the northernmost county, right?
As far as I know, yes,
Southernmost one is Collier County, all the way down Naples,
correct.
and he has a couple towards the center of the state there also.
Yes,
And then he has the office in Lee County, correct?
yes, sir.
And that is the Maine State Attorney's office, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that is where Mr. Russell keeps his office, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were a member of the Lee County Sheriff's Office in Lee County, correct?
Yes, sir.
You would agree with me that you had more contact over your time and career with Mr. Russell than a dozen times. Agreed?
Yes,
And you actually would agree with me that you consider Mr. Russell more of a friend in that term than you would consider Tom Lewis, correct?
no, I've known Mr. Russell a longer period of time, but I wouldn't consider him any more of a friend than I would Chief Lewis.
You consider Mr. Russell a personal friend?
I consider him a professional friend.
Remember the deposition on May 17th, 2017? Remember that deposition?
Yes, sir, I do.
You're being asked the question, page 12, line 5.
I'm sorry, what?
Page 12, line 5. Question, okay, do you consider Mr. Russell a personal friend? Answer, yes.
Okay.
You testified here today when the state asked you, did you have any concern at all? And you understand what the word concern means, correct?
Yes, sir.
Concern means there's something about, let me ask you this, what do you believe the word concern means?
Concern would be an uneasiness or a issue about something that's going to happen or has happened or...
And when you testified to the jury today, you told the jury that you had no concerns as far as knowing both of these people at all, correct?
Correct.
Now, isn't it true in the deposition that when I asked you about, did you have any concerns, when the state asked you about this, being involved in a case that dealt with one of your friends prosecuting another one of your friends, you recall answering, I had concerns only because I knew both of them, understanding the situation we were in. But I understand there's a job to be done and a case to be completed.
I did, yes.
So you admit that when I asked you if you had any concerns in May, you expressed that you did have concerns, correct?
Yes.
You understand that the state attorney's office has its own ability, budget, independence.
Objection relevance?
Approach. You may.
You understand that the state attorney has the capacity to consult with any expert or anybody witness they want in the case, correct?
Yes.
And in this case, when they came to you, and now you have agreed you had these concerns, you still nonetheless became involved in this case, correct?
Yes.
And you became involved in this case because they asked you, correct?
Yes, sir.
You accepted this case in your testimony. By the way, you're no longer working at the Lee County Sheriff's Office, right?
Correct.
You're a civilian citizen now, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so you agreed to work with them on this case and tell the jury in consulting with them what you had charged them for your time to assist them in this case.
I did not charge them for my time.
So you agreed to even do this for free, right?
Yes?
Now, in your job that you work with in training people, what's the name for the public school system, or the public?
It's Southwest Florida Public Service Academy.
Public Service Academy. You do things for them there also, correct?
I do.
And when you do things for them, you expect them to pay you, correct?
I do.
And you accept money from them, correct?
I do.
Okay. And when you worked as a law enforcement officer, they paid you, correct?
I did.
You understood then, before you got involved in this case with your concern, that you yourself had a choice as to whether you would get involved in this case, correct?
I did.
Now, when you said today that you reviewed the discovery, would you agree with me that what you reviewed in this case was you reviewed statements of some individuals in this case, correct?
Yes, sir.
You did not review the statements of all individuals, correct?
Only what was supplied by the state attorney's office.
Okay, so the state attorney's office gave you certain information that they wanted you to consider and other information they did not provide to you. Fair to say?
I can only speak to the fact that they issued or gave me information to review. I don't know if they did not give me something they didn't give me.
So before I asked that, yesterday when I saw you out there and we talked, I briefly said to you, Mr. Sims, is there anything else that you have reviewed since the deposition since then that you consider or anything else?
Correct.
And you told me there's nothing else I've looked at since we talked in May.
That's correct.
Okay. So your testimony in May would still be accurate today. Agreed?
Yes.
Okay. So they gave you the following statements to review. They gave you Chief Lewis's statement, the FDLA, correct?
Yes, sir.
Captain Woodard's, correct?
Yes, sir.
Captain Ciaccini's,
Yes, sir.
Lieutenant Salzman's,
Yes, sir.
Lieutenant Hack,
Yes, sir.
and Corporal Duvall, correct?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Six people were the only statements that you reviewed, correct?
Correct.
State Attorney's Office did not give you any other statements of any other witness that would have been there, involved, testified, anything, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you know how many witnesses were involved in this case that would have information about what happened here?
No, sir.
You reviewed a portion of the video, correct?
Yes, sir.
And how long was the portion of the video that you reviewed? Estimate time-wise.
Less than 2 minutes?
Okay. So again, who provided you that video to review?
State attorney's office.
Were you aware there's an hour and 54 minutes worth of video capture leading up to this whole event as far as other people out there doing things, etc.? Did you review any of that?
No, sir.
Were you aware there was an hour and 54 minutes worth of video captured leading up to the shoot, don't shoot event?
No, sir.
When the state said to you the word earlier, you reviewed the discovery, that's a term we use in cases, correct?
Yes, sir.
You're familiar with that in law enforcement. It's like a term we use in the legal process, right?
Yes, sir.
And tell the jury what discovery in our language usually refers to.
It refers to the evidence that may be involved in the case, depositions, statements from any witnesses, anything to do with the case itself.
Really, discovery involves everything that the state would have that they're basically obligated to turn over to anybody they accuse of a crime.
Correct.
Okay. And so discovery is not a word that talks about one or two things. It's kind of a global of everything, right?
Yes, sir.
So when the state originally asked you if you reviewed discovery, was it your position that you had reviewed all the discovery, or just what they gave you?
Just
Overruled.
just what was provided to me by the state.
Okay. So, did you review the 241-page FDLE report done in this case?
I did not.
Okay. How many pages of an FDLE report do you think you reviewed that the state gave you before you testified?
30 page maybe? I'm not sure exactly the count.
So you would agree with me that all these things that you testified here to today about, your opinion, which these are your opinions that you're giving, correct?
Yes.
You're not speaking on the behalf of any any other agency. These are just your opinions as a civilian here testifying with your experience, correct?
Yes, sir.
Your opinions then were formulated by the input of what the state gave you to consider, correct? As far as this event.
Based on my experience and knowledge throughout the years, yes.
Okay. And so you don't have any other knowledge about this event other than, tell me if I'm correct, something you've heard in the media, right?
Correct?
What the state gave you, correct?
Correct.
And that's it.
And my experience.
Well, your experience all happened before this event, right?
Yes.
So I'm asking about the framework of what happened on August 9th, 2016. Your familiarity of that came from the media and what the state gave you, correct?
Yes, sir.
Because you weren't there and you weren't part of the investigation, right?
Correct.
By the way, did anybody during the investigation from the investigating agency seek you out for your opinion?
No, sir.
Now, you started as an auxiliary officer in 1979, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you went full-time in 1980,
Yes, sir.
and then you retired in 2014, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Because you started out in 1979, you were familiar in an era when law enforcement primarily carried revolvers, right?
Correct.
And therefore, you knew about shooting events and things like that where they train on revolvers, right?
Yes, sir.
And that's how you were aware of something called a wad cutter, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that basically is your knowledge and experience that you have the benefit of because you were doing this up to 38 years ago, right?
Yes, sir.
But you would agree with me that an officer of this generation of semi-automatics would not necessarily have any idea about what wad cutters are, correct?
Correct.
And you would agree with me that then the question becomes, well, when did basically the shift of revolvers to wad cutters happen in the law enforcement culture, correct?
Correct.
And that would be sometime in the 80s to mid-90s, somewhere in there.
That would probably be accurate for most agencies, yes.
Okay. So today it's 2000, let's go to 2016. 2016, if we had a law enforcement officer with 16 years experience, they are entering the law enforcement culture around the year 2000, correct?
Yes.
We are well past the use of standard use of revolvers across most agencies at that point, correct?
For the most part, however, the Department of Corrections just recently, within the last year and a half, did away with revolvers.
So again, it would depend on what the officer is dealing with, if he had experience with the officer, the Department of Corrections, or if he just went straight to the police academy and went to a police agency, correct?
Correct.
And you'd agree with me that 16 years experience is a pretty substantial number of years for a law enforcement officer to have experience, right?
Yes.
Now, despite that, would you also agree with me that a law enforcement officer of any generation, whether it's from yours back in the 70s or somebody here starting in the late 90s, generally to become a law enforcement officer, you have to be able to read, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so the ability to read kind of transcends every generation of law enforcement, right?
Yes, sir.
And the ability to read permits a law enforcement officer, if they are looking at a box of ammo, to look at the box of ammo to identify what it is, right?
Yes, sir.
That's not something that generations change with wad cutters. That's something they all have today, the day before, 50 years back, right?
The ability to read, yes.
Ability to read. Okay. So, you've already testified on here that you looked at the wad cutter box that came in the Blazer, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, the wad cutter box is not a box that just has one side to it, does it?
No, sir.
In fact, most ammunition boxes don't just have one side, correct?
Correct.
And you'd agree with me that in your training and experience, that manufacturers, when they make ammo, for many reasons, will list things on the boxes involving safety, correct?
Yes, sir.
One of the reasons is because they want the product to be used safely, correct?
Yes, sir.
Another reason is because they don't want to be sued over it, correct?
Correct.
So, when we look at State 64, this is a Winchester Super X 38, special smokeless blank, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, clearly marked on the front so somebody can read that says blank, correct?
Yes, sir.
And no question that in your training experience, a trained law enforcement officer reading that would understand that this does not fire a projectile like a live round.
Correct.
It was stage 102. Blazer box. The front of it says, well, does the front of it say anything about blank?
No, sir.
Anything in your training experience that a law enforcement officer is able to read, looking at that, somehow determines that those are blanks?
No, sir.
In fact, the front of it has a line down here that says, keep out of the reach of children. See all warnings on that panel, right?
Yes, sir.
Did you actually, well, you have is that right?
Who?
The evidence that's over here.
Yes, you may.
Okay, sorry. And actually, Judge Karen, you have the gloves. Well, you have it right here. So keep the gloves. Yeah, you can put those on, because you have to pick it up first. You move the gloves. Go ahead.
One glove? Whatever, that's fine. Whatever he's comfortable with gloves.
Can you go ahead and pick up what's in evidence? Grab us a moment, make sure. Can you go ahead and pick up what's admitted to evidence, the Blazer cartridge? Can you see the back of the Blazer cartridge on there? The back of the instructions?
Yes.
No, now approach again.
You may.
Okay.
Can you read for the jury what the warning is in the back of that instruction?
Says CCI Blazer is the perfect target practice and training cartridge for shooters who don't reload their ammo. Blazer used a non-reloadable case made from high-strength aircraft-grade aluminum alloy. Cases are coated for smooth function and corrosion resistance. Blazer is primed with non-corrosive, non-metallic CCI primers for clean, reliable ignition. A wide selection of spear bullets is available in Blazer ammo. Blazer combines high value and high performance.
Anything about that language that would alert a person reading to it that there is a bullet in that box?
Only the fact that it talks about a wide selection of spear bullets is available in Blazer ammo.
What about the first line? What does it say that's for?
Perfect target in practice and training cartridge.
Okay, so target practice involves doing what? Trying to hit a target, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that means using a gun that has something that can leave the gun to hit the target.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that should be something on there to let you know that this bullet in here is for target practice, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Is there any other warnings on that box when you're looking at it that would alert you that that is not a blank, besides the fact of the absence of blank and the fact that it's used for target practice?
There is a warning on the back or the bottom of the box.
Okay. Tell the jury what that warning does to let us know that these are not blanks.
Warning: to avoid possible severe injury, only use ammunition as exactly matches markings of your gun. Use only in firearms recommended for this type of cartridge. If firearm fails to fire, keep it pointed in a safe direction. Wait, unload carefully. Avoiding exposure to the breech. Keep barrel free of any obstruction. Wear shooting glasses. Wear proper hearing protection. Repeated exposure to gunfire can damage hearing. This ammunition is assembled with cartridge cases produced by an advanced process. Use a lightweight, high-strength alloy and modified primer system. However, they are not to be reloaded. Lead warning. Talks about lead usage. CCI ammunition. I'm sorry, it's got fingerprint powder on it, so it's kind of hard to read through it. But
So again,
yep.
Those things that you read in your training experience would indicate that there are bullets in this, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the only skill you have to have then to do what you just did there is to be able to read the same things you just read.
Yes, sir.
What else is on the box that tells you that there's a bullet in that?
Both ends of the box are marked, in this particular case, CCI Blazer ammunition, 38 Special, 148 GR HBWC, which is 148 grain hollow-based wad cutter.
And what does grain refer to?
The weight of the projectile.
Okay. And is that something commonly associated in law enforcement experience with a bullet?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that a trained law enforcement officer throughout any of the firearms training or FDLE training, the term grain is a known term to law enforcement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you would expect a law enforcement officer to understand what the word grain means, right?
Yes, sir.
And HBWC, tell me what that means.
Hollow-based wad cutter.
Yeah. That's just the acronym on there, though, correct? The box doesn't say wad cutter itself.
No, sir. It says HBWC.
So, in your training experience, before using any ammunition, you agree with me that it's the duty of the person that's going to use it to understand what that ammunition is before they put it in the gun and pull the trigger?
Absolutely.
Okay. And so, if a person said, well, it says HBWC and I don't know what that means, you agree with me there's a mechanism to find out what that means, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, you would agree with me on the Winchester blanks box. Likewise, there are warnings, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what, well, let's take a step back. You would agree with me that a basic tenet of law enforcement training on firearms is don't point a weapon at somebody unless you intend to shoot them, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's not something that's even in your training experience, like some random thing they hear about every now and then. It's kind of a repeated thing pounded into them in their training, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so the box of blanks, are there warnings on that consistent with how you point a gun if you're going to use them?
Yes, sir.
Okay, tell the jury what that box says.
It says, warning, to avoid serious injury / death to shooter and bystanders. Keep firearms pointed in a safe direction at all times. Do not, and not is capitalized, point or fire loads in directions of person or animal. Hot gases and filler materials will be discharged from the gun muzzle. Do not use propel projectiles. Use only in firearms in good conditions with markings exactly matching the ammunition. Always check barrel and remove obstructions before firing. If firearms fails to fire, point muzzle in a safe direction. Avoid exposure to the breech while carefully unloading. Use shooter glasses and hearing protection. Always keep ammunition dry. Store in cool, dry place. Discharging firearms in poorly ventilated areas, cleaning firearms or handling ammunition result in exposure to lead and other substances known to cause birth defects, reproductive harm, and other serious physical injury. Have adequate ventilation at all times. Wash hands thoroughly after exposure. Since reloading practices are beyond our control, we disclaim all liability for damage, injury, or death that may result.
So, the initial part of that instruction, you agree with me, contemplates it's going to be can be used near people or animals because it talks about pointing it in a safe manner, correct?
Yes.
All right. So, again, any person receiving this box that is analyzing what's going to go in their gun has the benefit to go to read these things, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, would you agree with me, well, let me ask you this. Blanks don't come in a particular color, right?
Correct. They could come in a variety of different casing materials.
Okay, so the fact in this case that the Winchester known blank is brass and the wad cutter is kind of a gray or silverish color there, that alone would not alert somebody that something is or is not a blank, correct?
Correct.
Now, the Winchester package that you saw there, have you ever opened a box of Winchesters before?
Yes.
Okay. Do they come in some type of contained way, where they're like individually separated, or are they just kind of all in there?
The live rounds of ammunition that I've been exposed to from Winchester are in a container similar to what the Blazer was, in either a cardboard separator or some type of plastic separator to individually separate the rounds.
And you're talking about live rounds with a projectile on them, correct?
Yeah.
I'm asking you about the blanks. Would you agree with me that the blanks that come in the Winchester are kind of just loose?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you had agreed with me before that on May 17th, you had told me that you had never seen a box of blanks that are just thrown together where the blanks are loose, correct?
Not unless they're already opened.
Okay. But you understand Winchester, when you get them, if you open them up, they're already loose from the manufacturer.
I'll take your word for that.
So you just don't know the answer to that. Is that correct?
I've never bought a brand new box of Winchester or used a box of brand new Winchester, so I don't know how they originally came from the factory.
Okay. So my question then beyond is, but when you're dealing with live rounds, you agree with me that in live rounds you've bought from a manufacturer, you're going to see them in your experience individually separated, correct?
The majority of the time, yes, unless they were bought in bulk.
Okay. I'm talking about just the boxes.
If they're bought in a box, they're individually
So
packaged.
again, if a person opened the box of the Blazers, would they find them loose or individually separated?
If they were a new box of ammunition, they would be individually separated.
Do you have the blazer box that's there? Can you open that box? And is there a sleeve that you can remove?
There's a plastic container that holds the ammunition.
And is that, okay, can you hold that up for a second?
Yes,
so we can see? And is that the way what you're talking about, that individual bullets that are separated individually are normally seen when you open a box?
Yes, something similar to this, based on various manufacturers use different type of thing. This one's a flat sheet. Some of them are fully enclosed.
Okay. And so again, that would be, in your training experience, another indicator to a person that now, let's say if they haven't read the box, that's opening it, that should alert them that there is a live round in there, correct?
It should, yes.
Approach. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you've been hearing testimony for about an hour and a half. I think it's a good time to take a stretch break, restroom break, whatever you need. I'll have you brought back out here at 10:45. All right, you may be seated. You're getting it, Your Honor. All right, sir, you are still under oath. You may.
In your 38 years of law enforcement training and experience, have you ever had to train or teach or instruct anybody about issues of combining blanks with watercolors?
Only in my early years as a firearms instructor when we were still carrying revolvers. 80s.
So you would agree with me that an issue or a concern of an officer combining blanks and watercolors day would be unusual?
Yes.
Not something you would reasonably expect a law enforcement officer to do with proper training.
Correct.
We talked before about issues as far as the crowd. You'd agree with me that the blanks, and you already read the box there, you'd agree with me that the blanks, by the warnings themselves, there is acknowledgement, at least from the blanks manufacturer and the warnings that you read, that blanks are going to be used in the presence of people, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the part of the warning that you read that talked about that death or serious bodily injury could occur deals with the fact of pointing a blank at somebody as far as in a range that it could hurt them, correct?
It doesn't designate a range on the box. It just designates pointing at another person.
Right. And so on the warning, it's saying that death or bodily injury can occur, and it lists so don't point, right?
Correct.
It doesn't say death or bodily injury can occur if they're used properly or safely, correct?
It doesn't indicate on the box how they're to be used, other than pointed in a safe direction and not to be pointed at a person or an animal.
Right, so let's talk about a safe direction. You'd agree with me, if you understand that, let's say, in canine training, in all your years of experience, did you have knowledge that in order to certify with a canine dog, the officers had to use blanks?
Common practice, yes, sir.
Okay, common practice. And those would be in guns that are capable of firing live rounds as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so when an officer then is using a gun that has blanks, you'd agree with me that the safe manner in which to do it is to aim it downward, correct? That's one safe manner.
That is one safe manner, yes.
Now when they're aiming it downward next to their body, how far is their leg or their body away, generally, in distance, from the discharge out of that gun of the blank?
I'm sorry, you're indicating the distance from the muzzle to the ground, or the distance away from their leg?
From their own body.
That would be hard to answer. It depends on the shooter and how close they're holding. One person may hold it 6-7 inches from their body. Somebody may hold it 2 feet from their body.
Okay. And so your examples there, 6-7 inches or 2 feet, when they're holding it down, that's considered to be safe, correct?
It could be, yes. Yes.
If a safe manner, it's okay to hold it down and aim it down, and the shooter has the gun with the blank coming out of it, it's going to be in some proximity to their own body, correct?
Correct.
You can only get it as far away as their arm.
That is correct.
And their arm, to move it further away, the further away you get, the higher you'd have to raise the arm, correct?
Correct.
So we know there's a point that when you're lifting the arm that you're suddenly in a pointing range where you could point at somebody, correct?
Certainly.
So a safe way to do that is involving the arm coming down in a range that you're not pointing at somebody, right?
Correct.
And when you do that, you actually bring the gun with the blank coming out closer to the body of the person firing it, correct?
That is correct.
And if that's considered safe, whatever distance that is a safe distance to discharge that blank in that manner, right?
Correct.
Okay. So you would agree with me that in the use of a blank, if used properly, there's a safe way to do it, that it does not create a risk of death or great bodily harm to somebody that might be near the blank, correct?
Correct.
You'd agree with me that the blank gun, do you agree with me that the use of a blank gun in discharging a blank is most dangerous if it's put in a contact position with a body? Would you agree that's the most dangerous way to use that gun?
That would be the most dangerous way to use the gun.
Right, that's what I asked. So that's the most dangerous way, right?
Yes.
And tell the jury why that way is the most dangerous way to use a gun in blanks.
As I explained before, as you fire a blank cartridge, there is gunpowder inside that casing, and they're again held in there by some type of stop, whether it be cardboard wadding or wax wadding. When that gunpowder ignites, it creates a tremendous amount of pressure and gases in there in order to be able to propel a projectile out the end of a barrel and travel however far it's designed to go. So there's a great amount of energy there. If you were to, as the defense attorney explained, put it contact close to a person and pull the trigger, there's enough energy and unspent gunpowder that it is going to create a wound and penetrate human flesh or an animal's flesh and cause some type of injury or up to and including death.
Which, the next step away from that is then, if the blank gun is used properly, the proper way to do it is, would you agree, is to aim down or aim straight up?
As taught in curriculum, our definition of a safe direction is dictated by the environment. Most of the time, for instance, if you're outdoors, that type of thing, you're on a single plane, then downward would probably be a safe direction.
And the safe direction doesn't just apply to a citizen that may be here, that applies to other officers too. Any human, whether they're wearing a uniform or not, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So in the use of then the gun that does the blank, they use that in canine training, correct?
Yes, sir.
In the presence of obviously other officers, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so there is a safe way to use that in the presence of people that does not create a likely risk of death or great bodily harm. Agreed?
Yes.
Okay. This ammunition round is, as you described before, it's like a detergent type of thing, right?
Yes, sir.
In layman's terms, kind of similar to what we see on like the paint guns or that type of thing.
Similar, yes.
Okay. And those things, generally, if you shoot them out, the distance of where they could travel, what you have to look out for is about 10 to 15 yards, correct?
Approximately, yes.
A live, let's say, 38 round bullet with a projectile, okay? Those can travel over 5,000 feet, right?
Probably, yes.
Okay. So, when we're talking about the use of a blank as far as safety, would you agree with me that let's say you're dealing with a 38 in particular.
Okay.
What we're dealing with in a 38 in particular is whether there is a blank round in there that is a 38 blank round that can be fired safely in a safe manner, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the other part of this is whether there is a live round that has a projectile on it like a 38 round bullet, correct?
Okay.
You understand that?
Yes, sir.
So, the danger if someone has a 38 live round bullet is not because a citizen or a person is just within 10 or 15 feet of somebody, right? That danger goes around to 5,000 feet around the whole area, correct?
With a live round, yes,
A
sir.
live round.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so, for example, if there was a canine demonstration using live bullet or live guns that could carry a 38 live round, but they have blanks, if there is a potential that if somebody put a live round in there and people are watching from 1,000 feet away in a stadium, let's say, right?
Okay.
The live round is in there. If there is a potential danger, those people, if there's a live round, are within range of it, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But would you agree with me that in your training and experience of law enforcement officers that you train, that it is not a likely, there's not a likelihood that an officer that's trained would not know the difference between a projectile head live round and a blank round? Would you expect after you train somebody and release them into the community that they would know the difference between a projectile with a bullet on it and a casing without a projectile or blank?
Once it's explained to them, yes.
Okay. And so it would not be likely that you would expect an officer to confuse a live round with a blank by their training and experience, correct?
I wouldn't expect them to, no.
Okay. You would agree with me that in your training of officers, once they are complete with their training and they get their certificate and they graduate, they are fully trained law enforcement officers, correct?
Yes, they meet the state standard.
Okay. And that's the standard that you're training them to do before you release them in the community, correct?
Correct.
Now, in your training and experience here, the 2-minute video that you saw of Chief Lewis, did you see him standing with the crowd?
Yes, sir.
And you testified before, difficult for you to tell how far that crowd was from the actual scenario, correct?
Correct.
The fact that Chief Lewis was with the crowd in your training and experience in a demonstration of any type, and you have done, I guess, been involved and seen and discussed demonstrations and safety and things like that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Would you agree with me that in this particular one you viewed, you would not expect the chief in that role with the crowd to be doing the safety checks.
No, I wouldn't expect that.
Okay? Because you would see the chief's role as what in your training experience in dealing with these?
Being the figurehead for the agency, greeting, meeting, shaking hands, introducing his staff.
It would, in your training and experience, believe that you would agree with me that the role of anybody doing safety checks could be somebody from the training division, correct?
That would be the ideal situation, yes.
Okay. And so if a person who's from the training division, you don't know any particulars of this case as to who Chief Lewis thought was doing anything or who discussed doing anything, you don't know any of the facts of what was said before this began, correct?
Only from what was in their statements that were provided to me.
Okay. So then you would not disagree that a person from the training division would be an appropriate person to do a safety check, correct?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
You would not disagree that a person who's part of the training division, okay, is an appropriate person to be doing safety checks.
They would be appropriate. However, I would prefer somebody from the training unit that was also a certified firearms instructor would be ideal.
Okay. The fact that somebody's not a certified firearms instructor, though, you would agree with me, does not prevent somebody who is a training officer from doing a proper safety check.
No.
In fact, you don't have to be a certified firearms instructor, did you say?
Yes, sir.
You don't have to be a certified firearms instructor to recognize the difference between a projectile bullet and a blank, correct?
You shouldn't, no.
You, in your training experience, worked in capacity of command, correct?
Yes, sir.
And when you say colonel, tell the jury what that involved as far as your command level.
At the Lee County Sheriff's Department, as part of the rank structure, the sheriff obviously is the CEO or head of the agency. Underneath that, we had a chief deputy, and then under that, we had 2 colonels. One colonel over corrections and the facilities thereof, and the other colonel was over law enforcement and administration, and that's what I retired as, is the colonel over law enforcement as an executive bureau.
And I'm asking this next question basically as to your training and experience in general, not applicable to any particular agency, but your understanding in your training experience as to the position of supervision at command level.
Can we approach?
You may. You may.
your training and experience, that includes the time where you were at the command level, correct?
Yes, sir.
And part of your training and experience when you teach people about firearms, when you teach them about that, is you teach them about things as far as the order of who they listen to and who a training officer is and things like that, regardless of where they are in the state, correct?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
You would agree with me that as a command level person in your training experience, it is known when you train and you have knowledge of that command level delegates responsibilities, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so when it comes to firearms or firearm safety, you would agree with me as the concept of command and law enforcement in general, that command has a right, and actually in inner workings in general, has a right to delegate responsibilities in relation to firearms, correct? You follow the question?
I understand your question. I would answer it in the fact that you can delegate authority, but you cannot delegate responsibility.
Okay, but responsibility as to whether you delegated something for somebody to do, I'm just talking about the fact command level can delegate somebody to be the training officer, correct?
Certainly.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm not saying that somebody delegates the way that if they learn of something or they know of something, they have no responsibility.
Correct.
I'm talking about they can just delegate somebody else to take the role to train.
Certainly.
Okay. And they can delegate somebody to take a role to set up an event that involves the public or other officers, correct?
Certainly.
They can delegate the role of people to be responsible to make sure that proper safety checks are done with any firearms, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that is something that, from your training experience, from a command level, actually is necessary to run any law enforcement agency, correct? Law enforcement command has to be able to delegate.
Absolutely.
When you delegate, would you agree with me, from a training and law enforcement experience, that delegation, inherent within it, is that the persons or people that you delegate to are going to...
Objection, Your Honor.
Approach? You may.
So when a command delegates, then there is a expectation, or it's reasonable to expect that the people that you delegate to are going to do their job properly as they have been trained, correct?
Yes, sir.
You have no idea in this case what the delegations were involving this scenario, do you?
No, sir.
In the limited materials you reviewed for this scenario, were you able to determine that Lee Cole was the ultimate stopgap, for lack of a better term, as to ensuring the safety of the use of his weapon?
Yes.
Would you agree with me the last one to handle the firearm should be the last one to inspect it?
Yes.
Would you agree with me Lee Cole is ultimately responsible for what went into his firearm?
Ultimately, yes.
You agree with me that he's ultimately responsible for how he chooses to use that firearm?
Yes, he has the final act because it's in his hands, but it would also depend on what he was instructed to do as his role in a scenario.
And so you would agree with me in all of your 38 years of experience that you would know, because you're familiar with FDLE's curriculum, correct?
Yes, sir.
That he would have been instructed to never point a firearm at somebody unless he intends to shoot them, correct?
I would hope that was the instruction.
Well, would you expect FDLE would have left that out for Lee Cole?
No,
Okay, so you would expect that he would have been told that, correct?
I would expect that, yes.
And whether anybody else told him that, he would know that from his training, correct?
Yes.
Now, you don't know in this case what efforts and what amount of firearm safety had been told to Lee Cole throughout his time with the agency, correct?
No, sir.
You don't know what forms he would have had to have signed that may have reflected, don't point the gun at anybody unless you intend to shoot them, correct?
The only form I'm familiar with was one that I reviewed that talked about ammunition and safety. There was 3 different subject matters on that form that obviously one of their employees had to sign.
Was it one that he signed stating, don't point the gun at somebody unless you intend to shoot them?
I don't recall. I think it dealt more with ammunition and what was authorized by their agency.
Okay. You would agree with me that no amount of written policy or safety checks could stop a person that decided on their own to violate rules of law, policy, their own training, correct? They choose to violate it, they violate it.
Correct?
You would agree with me, though, that it is not it would not be likely in your training and experience of law enforcement officers, it would not be likely that a trained law enforcement officer would choose to violate state law or his policy or his training and use a gun unsafe, correct?
Correct.
Always possible that somebody could do something, right?
Always possible.
But not likely a trained law enforcement officer is going to do that, correct?
That's correct.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as defense. I'm sorry.
You may. Yes, and what is it for the record?
Let me show you what the marking section is right now. Do you recognize this from something that you reviewed?
It appears to be a picture depicting the video.
Okay, so is that consistent with what you saw in the video?
A single frame of it, yes.
Okay, but it's consistent with
Yes.
what you saw in the video? And that's the part of the video that the state provided you a frame from that video?
Yes.
But at this time, I review for identification purposes.
State. State's exhibit, defense exhibit B will be admitted into evidence per stipulation. You may. You may.
Now, Mr. Sims, still from the video here, that you viewed, the position that Lee Cole is in, can you describe what that position is in basically law enforcement terms?
It appears to be a modified isosceles shooting stance.
Tell the jury what a modified isosceles shooting stance is.
Basically, he's square to the target. His hips, his shoulders would be square, and his arms are locked out in what they would be an isosceles triangle. There again, it,
triangle, I call those isosceles.
correct. And it is modified because he is standing at a slight angle. He's not perfectly square to them, almost in a modified, his lower body is almost in a modified weaver, which is a bladed stance at about a 45 degrees.
And so the jury understands in our language, tell them what bladed means.
May I stand up?
You may.
An isosceles shooting stance would be, I would be square to the target, and I would be in this position here. If he's in what they call a modified weaver stance as a right-handed shooter, he would be slightly bladed at about a 45-degree angle, and he's shooting in this fashion. Looking at the picture, it almost looks he's bladed at the bottom and almost shooting as an isosceles shooting stance in the upper position.
Now, in the normal use of that stance, is that something law enforcement's trained to do?
Yes.
And are they trained to do that when they're trying to shoot somebody?
Shooting, or they may be covering their subject, but they're ready to fire if need be.
Okay. And in that stance, are there reasons they're trained to use that stance as far as they're going to discharge the weapon to shoot somebody? Is there something about that makes the gun better held or makes the aim better?
Well, they're in a stable platform. A good two-handed grip on the firearm is much more stable than a single-handed grip. They're able to absorb the recoil on the firearm better, which would enable them to do a follow-up shot or follow-up shots in a more rapid succession. Also, in an isosceles shooting stance, when we get into the law enforcement side of it, there are a lot of pros and cons to both weaver and isosceles. Isosceles puts your body armor that officers wear in the front of them versus being bladed. You have unprotected areas, those type of things. So there's pros and cons to both sides of it.
So let me ask you this. Is this considered pointing a gun at somebody?
Yes.
if the purpose of using the blanks is to make a sound, is this required to make a sound?
No,
Is this a safe manner in which to use a gun to fire a blank?
no,
Would this position in the use of a blank violate the training that FDLE gives as far as how to handle a firearm?
yes,
Would you agree with me that if the point of the, well, you already said the point of the shoot don't shoot is the blank serves as like a noisemaker, basically, right?
correct. It duplicates, or it is gunfire, which would stimulate the scenario to add more realism to the event.
And so that can be done to have that moment happen in a manner in which the gun could just be down and you could fire one round or two, correct?
Correct.
It's not, would you agree with me, for a shoot, don't shoot scenario in the concept of it in your training and experience, it's not necessary to unload the whole chamber of a gun?
Correct.
The other question I have for you is this. In the video, do you remember that when Lee Cole is firing, he's moving in a backwards direction?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Again, is that consistent with a safe manner in which to discharge the blank for the purpose of this scenario?
No.
Okay. Tell me what happens when movement, the person moves back, and you're trying to fire. What goes into that?
Well, anytime you're moving and trying to fire, that's certainly going to hinder your sight picture and be able to concentrate on your sights and line it up with your target versus being standing in a fixed position locked on your target. There's also the possibility as you're moving backwards to stumble, trip, fall.
Can it affect where the end muzzle of your gun is as far as whether it's up, whether it's down? Can it move it around while you're moving?
Obviously.
Would you agree with me that even if you're holding the gun straight up and the muzzle's slightly down, that is still improper? This
Yes.
position?
Yes.
Would you also agree with me that you saw the gun that was in this case?
I've seen pictures of it, yes.
Would you agree with me that in your training experience, there's part of the training you do is when some people aim the gun forward or when they're training, they can have, because either their hands are large or maybe they put their finger too far through the trigger, that when they go to pull it, it can cause the gun itself to dip down. Familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. You tell the jury how that happens, and when that happens, how you correct it.
Trigger manipulation of a firearm is the hardest part of teaching firearms there is. Stance, grip, sight alignment are fairly easy. Trigger manipulation is a little bit more difficult. Everybody's hands are different sizes. The grips are different sizes. Ideally, you want to use the pad of your shooting finger or your index finger on the trigger, and it's a steady, smooth pressure all the way back until the weapon discharges. What we tell people is it should surprise you when it goes off, not scare you, but you shouldn't know the exact nanosecond it's going to fire. You're ready for it to fire, you want it to fire, but there again, with a nice smooth trigger press, it fires and you're ready for the next one. Reason for that, you're able to maintain your sight alignment, your sight picture, when what we call jerking the trigger. When you jerk the trigger and the gun moves before the weapon fires, your sights are no longer lined up and you're not on target anymore.
And when you have that jerking movement, can the muzzle dip?
Certainly.
So let me now show you what State Exhibit 26 already entered into evidence. Tell me if you can Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, again, you would consider the two hands up and posture basically to violate the aim of somebody, correct?
He's definitely in the process of, I don't know, because it's a still photo, whether he's just fired it or he's fixing to fire it, or if that's the position he's going to fire from, or he's raising it up higher or lower.
One of the reasonable outcomes of what you see there, the end part, the muzzle, what you call it, the end part?
Yes, the muzzle.
The end part of that muzzle, which is at a slight angle there. One of the reasonable outcomes of that is what you just described here. If he's pulled it and it's dipped, right?
Could be.
Okay. Now, standing still and firing, is that more likely or less likely to cause the gun to dip?
That would depend on the shooter and the experience they've had to shoot it. It could dip either from a still position or a moving position.
If you're moving back, though, you have less control over your gun when you're moving?
Typically, yes, but it would there again depend on the experience of the shooter.
Even in this position, and showing you that's in this scenario, even if that gun is in the position you saw, still an improper pointing of the weapon towards Ms. Knowlton, correct?
Certainly.
You would agree with me that in the scenario you looked at, if a wad cutter had never made it into this gun, the tragedy would happen, correct?
There's a good possibility, yes. It's a good possibility it would have never happened.
Well, you understand that in the sense that the blank gun, you even agreed that even if there's a discharge of the blank gun, you have gas coming out, right?
Correct?
And there's that little piece of cardboard that the jury can see the size of that just keeps the gunpowder in, right?
Correct?
And even you yourself said that the range of that, where it may cause you some injury, not necessarily death or anything like that, could be anywhere from a few feet up to 7 feet, somewhere in there?
Could be.
Okay. It's generally not going to be anything that if you're further than that you're really going to be necessarily injured, correct? It's not likely you're going to be injured by a blank gun if you're beyond 7 feet.
Correct.
Do you know the distances in which Lee Cole chose to discharge the gun in relation to this moment?
Only a estimated number based on looking at the video. I've seen no actual measurements.
And you would agree with me that we know, well, did you see pictures of the vehicle that was hit?
I did.
Okay. You would agree with me that the distance of wherever they are, for Lee Cole's bullets to hit the hood, he'd have to be further back than the hood. Agreed?
Correct.
And you actually saw that there's a bullet hole inside the door of the car, correct?
Correct.
So wherever he's shooting, as he's moving back, we have at least the distance of the Crown Victoria between Lee Cole and Miss Knowlton, correct?
Correct.
And then we have some distance of Miss Knowlton at a distance away from the car, correct?
Correct.
You don't know what that number is, right?
Correct.
You don't know if that number exceeds 7 feet, correct?
Correct.
You would agree with me that if Lee Cole had used an approved blank, not a wad cutter, and had fire the weapon down in a safe manner, this tragedy does not happen.
Based on what you're describing and no other variations of that, correct.
Well, based on what you saw there, again, if he is in a position of that, he's in the same distances from this molten.
Sustained.
What I describe is what you saw, correct? Let me rephrase that. What I described in those distances is what you contemplated in your answer to me. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree with me in your training experience that when you're done training officers and you have put them out into the community, that with proper training, it is not likely that an officer is going to load wad cutter ammunition into their weapon?
Sustained.
When you train law enforcement officers and release them in the community, they are considered trained in the firearm training that you have done, correct?
Yes.
And part of that training then involves whatever ammunition that they're going to use, right?
No.
So you don't train ammo.
We train ammo depending on the range that we use as to what type of training ammo we may train with, they qualify with. Once they leave the academy and they report to their respective agencies, the ammunition that they used would be then dictated by policy of that agency.
Okay, so there's nothing happening. So the policy of the agency will dictate the ammo they're permitted to use, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in your training and experience as in firearms and testimony here, would you agree with me that it is not likely that a trained law enforcement officer would violate their policies on introducing ammunition that's not approved?
Sustained.
You teach classes on firearms training, right?
Yes, sir.
You never have done a class doing a one-on-one comparison between a wad cut and a 38 blank, correct?
Not as a particular class. We cover currently what a blank ammunition round is and go over the curriculum. Prior to the wad cutter being taken out of the curriculum, both items were discussed, but never a specific class on the two of them.
Right, it's not a class to say, look, this is what you need to look out for certain bullets of this nature that are unique could be compared to a blank, correct?
Correct.
By the way, just for semantics, the projectile then when the jury has the bullets that you put in there, the projectile and the wad cutter is completely encased in the cylinder?
In the casing, yes, sir.
Is that the same as what I'm calling the cylinder? You call it the casing?
What you're referring to as a cylinder is the casing.
Okay, so it's completely contained in there, right?
Yes.
And a regular bullet, it's obviously out and not contained, right?
They're both regular bullets. It's just the configuration of them.
Okay.
Because that is a wad cutter. It is fully encased into the casing. A semi-wad cutter has a slightly different shape. It does protrude from the end of the casing.
Are you aware of any other bullet that has the projectile completely encased within the casing?
Not that we use in law enforcement.
Let's talk about a blank when it's discharged down towards the ground. You mentioned that gas has come out, correct?
Correct.
And the little cardboard thing at some point.
Correct.
If you fire a blank towards the ground, and let's say there's tall grass, okay, or loose grass, or something that's not set in stone. Is it possible when we do that you could have like a wind effect if something would like move like wind did?
It's possible.
If I had a gun in your training experience and I told you it's a blank and I aimed it down at the ground and you saw part of the ground move 6 to 12 inches, that alert you to something?
It possibly could. It'd certainly get my attention. First of all, I would have wanted to inspect the firearm before you fired it to see what you were firing. But once it was fired, there again, if it were a live round, it's going to do more than just move some grass. It's going to disrupt whatever it was being fired into, grass, dirt, clay, whatever. If it were a blank round, depending on the angle that it was fired from, the height from the muzzle to the ground, there certainly could have been enough gas pressure and debris coming out of it to move some tall grass.
But moving the ground is something that would alert you and you question whether it's a blank.
Certainly.
And so if that happened, then you would, well, in your training experience, that if, let me strike that. Do you instruct in the training of the officers that if there's something that looks amiss or unusual in the use of their weapon, that they need to take a step to inspect it?
Certainly.
And would you consider if somebody believed that they had blanks and they shot it in the ground and it moved part of the ground or any part of it 6 to 12 inches, that would qualify them as something that needs to be inspected?
Yes, I would.
You were unaware when we originally spoke that the Punta Gorda Police Department actually provided Lee Cole with department-approved blanks, correct?
That's correct.
And you did not know at that time whether the Punta Gorda Police Department carried water coverage, correct?
That's correct.
And you would agree with me that if an agency is providing approved ammunition to an officer, that they have a right to expect the officer is going to use the approved ammunition.
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
Correct.
When you talk about being recertified by FDLE as a firearm instructor, every 4 years, would you agree with me what's required on recertification is you have to basically just teach another class?
That, and they require some educational aspect of that as well.
So you go into like what they call a CLE, a continuing
Correct.
legal education type thing. And when the prosecutor originally asked you about training, what's the kind of first thing that's talked about? You talked about safety, something always taught, correct?
Yes, sir.
Safety is an issue that you would agree with me that is something that officers inherently are to know to do their job, correct?
Yes. I mean, it's something that's taught to them.
Okay. Well, and again, with the teachings, you expect them to comply with the teachings and trainings about safety, right?
Yes, sir.
Some of those teachings, with the prosecutor use the term, are common sense things. Would you agree with me on that?
Yes.
Now, when you testified about your issues and concerns about a real live weapon, you stated, quote, allowed to fire a live round. I want to talk to you about that. Was it your understanding that Lee Cole was allowed, as in given permission by the agency, to fire a live round projectile at Mary Knowlton?
it was my understanding that the weapon he used was capable of firing a live round. I don't know what was told to him or instructed him or anything of that nature.
Okay, so you weren't telling the jury that your objection was that he was allowed to fire a live round as if then anybody consented to what he did?
I'm assuming that they were aware he was using a live round since command staff was standing there and observed the situation.
Well, maybe we need to talk about what your term of live round is. Live round, I'm talking about in the issue, there's a projectile going to come up and hit somebody. What are you talking about?
Live round is any round that's capable of leaving that casing.
Okay, well, what we're talking about leaving the casing on blank is gas and a little piece of cardboard, right?
Correct.
Right? You would
Correct.
agree that's different than a live round with a piece of metal?
That is correct.
Okay.
But they're also fired out of a firearm that is capable of firing a fully projectiled round.
And so anytime canines training with a blank in your training experience, they're using guns that are capable of firing a live round that has a projectile, correct?
That's correct in a different environment.
Well, let me ask you this. You know there are community presentations where they do canine demonstrations, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and we've already talked about a live round in a 38 can go 5,000 plus feet, right?
Correct.
So if the inherent danger of you could put in a live round because it could hit somebody was the rule, then you'd agree with me that all those people watching from 500 feet away would be at risk also potentially being hit with a live round if one was in the gun, right?
That's correct.
But we know that that's not likely to happen because law enforcement is trained to properly load their gun, right?
That is correct.
Okay? So there is no state law that bans blanks that could be used to fire a live round from not being used in a community presentation, correct?
None that I'm aware of.
And in fact, you know in the training there that they talk about blank guns are fine for what you call to be training, correct? FDLE's curriculum. They're okay for training.
Correct.
Training involves other officers within 5,000 feet of another officer launching a blank, correct?
Not necessarily.
It can.
It could. It
Okay.
depends on, there are various types of training.
Right. Well, so my point behind this is the fact that a gun could, if used wrong, fire off a bullet that shouldn't be in there. That does not prevent the use of blanks safely from being done in a community presentation, right?
Correct.
What's an honor guard?
An honor guard that I'm aware of is used for memorial services, funeral services. It contains a color guard and a firing party.
Okay. And do they use something, what's it called, AR-15?
Some honor guards do, yes.
Now, we'll tell the jury what an AR-15 is.
An AR-15 is a long gun initially put together by Armalite, and that's what the AR stands for. And the 15 is designated for the Armalite 15 rifle. It is chambered in a .223 traditionally, which is also a 5.56 round, which is a military designation of that. Also, an AR can be chambered in other rounds other than the .223.
Okay. And so it's a military rifle stronger than a revolver. Would you agree with me on that?
Yes?
And it can fire further than a revolver. Agree
Yes.
on that? Okay. And so in a 21-gun salute, that's kind of consistent with the honor guard for memorials or anytime they're paying homage to a fallen officer or things of that nature, correct?
Correct?
And you know industry-wide that an honor guard that does the 21-gun salute is using a blank, correct?
Yes?
In a gun that they could put in a live round, correct? With a projectile,
Correct?
okay? If a gun is shot with a projectile in the air, even though you're not aiming at the person in front of you, that bullet that goes up must what?
Come down.
come down, okay? So that's why I take it, and we've heard the things about the 4th of July or whatever, don't be firing off live rounds straight up, it's dangerous, correct?
Correct?
And so the honor guards regularly, community presentation, fire off a blank, supposed to, in the air, correct?
Correct?
If somebody made a mistake and put a live round in there, somebody 5,000 feet away, 6,000, 8,000 feet away, could be struck by a live bullet, correct?
Correct?
But again, that's not likely to happen because law enforcement's trained how to use blanks, correct?
Correct?
You would agree with me that in the use of a blank, I believe you said this earlier, that it depends on how it's used or fired, correct?
And give me a little bit more, I'm not sure what your context is.
The context is a blank can be fired in a community presentation, as we discussed, in a safe manner that there's no likely risk of death or great bodily harm.
It could be, yes.
And if somebody uses it wrong, that increases the likelihood that somebody could be hurt, injured, or die, right?
Correct.
And you do not have a likely expectation by trained officers that they are going to do anything to do that in violation of their training, correct?
That is correct.
Have you ever shot a blank?
Yes.
And when you shot a blank, what is the manner in which you shot it?
Objection, relevance?
I'll rephrase it. You have experience in shooting a blank, correct?
Yes.
Okay. When you fire off the blank, would you ever in your training, when you're personally holding it in your hand, put it in a position where it's aimed at your own leg?
No.
Okay. The distance in which you would do it would be, I guess, be the radius kind of lower around you. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay.
Depending on what your radius definition
Sure.
is.
You definitely aren't having a person near you and doing this.
Correct.
When you're a firearms instructor, are you in a position where you need to see, when you're training new cadets, people who've never really used these things, you give them the guns for the first time? I'm talking past the rubber gun you use.
Yes.
Like you give them there. Are you concerned about them using it safely, the new ones?
There's always a concern. That's why we have multiple instructors with them.
And so when you have the students doing these type of shootings, or if you do a force-on-force training, are you there as the instructor?
Yes.
Okay. And the students that may be involved in, let's say, simunitions training, have you trained on simunitions before?
I have.
All right. Are you a simunitions trainer?
No.
Okay. So you're not. So have you ever run a simunitions force-on-force training session?
I've been involved with it. I have not run it.
You've been involved as a participant?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree? Well, let me ask you this then. In your training experience, of this as a participant, would you agree with me that the trainers are outfitted differently than the participants?
No.
Okay. So the trainers in your experience are outfitted with the same things the participants are doing that are expected to be hit? Do you follow my question?
Let me re-answer. The participants, what I'm referring to are the people that are portraying the bad guys
Right.
are in the same protective gear as the people portraying the officers.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So these two people are out there together because there may be simunition rounds coming at each other.
Yes.
It's force on force.
Correct.
You'd agree with me in a shoot, don't shoot, the same scenario is not set up. The citizen that has to make a decision to fire the simunition gun is not expected to be receiving force back, right?
It would depend on the scenario.
Well, let's say it's a scenario in which the scenario is designed that the blank gun is just supposed to make a noise.
Okay.
In that scenario, you would agree with me, the citizen is not to receive force back, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so that's different than the scenarios of which you know both officers could fire at each other and hit each other.
Correct.
And in the situations where the officers can fire each other and hit each other, they are outfitted because they're expected to be hit, correct?
Correct.
The training instructor is stepped back a little bit further, but in their proximity. And he is not outfitted in something because he has to be able to talk and communicate and bark instructions, right?
He is outfitted, but not to that extent. He probably has safety goggles, something of that nature on, so that at least his eyes are protected.
Right.
He even may have a mouthpiece in.
Right, but he is not outfitted the same way.
No.
Okay, but he's in proximity. If one of those guys wanted to turn to him and shoot him in the chest, he could get hit and he has nothing to protect him.
That's correct.
And again, the reason he doesn't have the chest thing on is because there's no likely expectation that these officers in training are going to disregard their training.
Objection asked and answered.
Sustained. Move on, counsel.
Judge, can I just have a moment?
You may.
On the, one question before I step back. On the wad cutter, the top of that, does it have kind of a bluish look to it? The top of the wad cutter, did you see like a bluish kind of color?
No.
Okay, it's like a gray color?
Yes. Color of lead.
Color of lead? Okay. Would you agree with me that the Winchester blank has nothing that appears to be either a gray or a blue, any color like that?
Correct.
The grass is seen throughout, right?
Correct.
Give me just one moment.
You may. Counsel, approach. Any redirect?
Yes, just briefly. So since when we're talking about a 21 gun salute with an AR-15, are those AR-15s checked prior to shooting?
Yes.
So the gun as well as the ammunition before they're shot?
Yes.
And through your training and experience, is a K-9 demonstration different than a shoot, don't shoot scenario?
Yes.
And if you don't use a real firearm, do you have to worry about whether or not you're pointing a gun at someone?
If it is not a real firearm and it's not capable of firing anything, then it's safe to point it at somebody.
Right? If you don't use a real firearm, do you have to worry about what kind of ammunition is loaded inside of it?
No.
Do you have to worry about the possibility of the ammunition ricocheting off of something like a car?
No.
Do you have to worry about the safe manner of discharging it?
No.
If you're going to delegate to someone, should you know who that person is that you're delegating to?
Absolutely.
Okay. And you reviewed the statements in this case from the command staff, the lieutenants, the captains, including the chief, correct?
Correct.
And who did the chief delegate the responsibility of safety officer to?
I believe it was to Captain Woodard.
Oh, he did? And you read that in his statement?
Captain Woodard was responsible for preparing the munitions gun
For Mary Knowlton.
for
correct?
Mary Knowlton.
Who took responsibility? I'm sorry. Who did he designate checking Lee Cole's firearm to?
I do not know.
Could you ever make a conclusion after reading all of the command staff statements?
No.
And when you're doing any kind of training at the gun range, how do you make sure that no outside ammunition is brought in?
In our particular case, if you're talking simulations training,
No, not necessarily ammunition, but let's say, well, yeah, okay, ammunition. How do you make sure that no outside ammunition is brought in?
for instance, if we're doing a simulations training scenario, it's incorporated into classroom as well. The officers that take part in that are in full uniform and have their firearms with them. Prior to any simulations training, they're instructed to take their firearms, chemical agent, any ammunition, knives, anything that is construed as a weapon back to their car, and it's put away. They come back into the training facility. They're met at a door by a certified firearms instructor and patted down to verify they have no weapons, no ammunition, no anything on them. They're taken from there into a sterile room for a staging area. And another part of the training facility are the simulations guns and simulations ammunition. 2 firearms instructors are in that room, and between the 2 of them, verify the ammunition, verify the magazines, and verify the firearms as to what is being loaded into those weapons. Once they're loaded into the weapons, they remain in the custody of those 2 officers. As the officers come from the sterile stage room into the firearms room where the firearms are staged, they are handed the weapons by those 2 officers, and from there they go directly out onto the range area to take part in the scenario. Once the scenario is over, firearms instructor that loaded the guns takes possession of those weapons again, takes them back into the loading room, and the process is repeated.
So you go through great lengths to make sure that no outside ammunition is brought in?
Absolutely.
Okay. And there was a lot of testimony on cross-examination about the dipping of the gun. Was the angle of the gun in State's Exhibit, I don't remember what it was, 26, is this consistent with the ammunition hitting the hood of the car?
From the angle of that still photo and the angle of the gun, yes, it would more than likely hit the hood of the car.
Okay. And you also discussed the wad cutters versus the blanks, and how it's the wad cutter is completely encased. On State's Exhibit 113, you can see that projectile, correct?
Yes.
And I believe the defense counsel started off talking about your relationship with Tom Lewis as well as Steve Russell. And he asked you in your deposition if you were personal friends, and you said yes. The next line, did he ask you if you were personal friends with Tom Lewis?
Yes.
And what did you say?
Yes.
Okay. And about your concerns about testifying in this case, it was asked if you had concerns about whether or not you would be biased either way, correct?
That's correct.
You have no concerns of that?
Correct.
Okay. And the fact that you didn't see the entire 2-hour video, does that change your opinion or your knowledge or your testimony about what these are?
No.
I have no further questions.
Briefly. doing lunch. Right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's just a little afternoon. I think it would be a good time for you all to break for lunch. Again, please do not discuss the case with anybody. You know my rules and my instructions about not doing any independent research, watching any news, any internet, blog, chat room, anything like that. Please advise the court if somebody approaches you and persists in speaking to you about the case. I'll give you a little bit longer than an hour. Be back here at about 10 after 1. And we'll see you back at that time. It was brought to my attention that there is a question that wanted to be posed by defense counsel about the FDLE manual, and the state has alleged that they have not had an opportunity to see this manual, so is the state requesting a Richardson hearing at this time?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, defense, why don't you tell me exactly what manual you're referring to and what you're anticipating?
Sure. Their witness that they knew ahead of time to provide a CD who they know his experience, or at least he testified in the deposition about his experience, which I noticed. The manual I'm talking about is the Criminal Justice Standards and Training Commission, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, 801 CMS Firearms Instructor Course, July 1st, 2011. He testified to the 2011 version. This is updated April 22nd, 2014, of which when I asked about the manuals, he said I read 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, not out yet. Right? And it's the Criminal Justice Specialized Instructor's Course. And this is a course that deals with the curriculum. It says the real basic group curriculum. CMS Firearm Instructor's Course, Specialized Instructor Course 801, which he says he's received training on and is familiar with. In this case, what has happened is that the state did a deposition of a witness in the Coles case that I was not present at, but I was providing the priority transcript. That witness testified yesterday as to the exchange between the state and the witness about role playing within the FDLE training. The state got back up and said, well, you didn't say that at your depo. And the witness said, well, because I was asked about it, I looked it up, and I can tell you about it. So that's when that was brought up into this trial, which is yesterday. This witness has said he is familiar with the FDLE curriculum and training, and I specifically then raised what about the firearm training manuals that go with it. This witness said I'm familiar with those too. I asked him what those refer to role playing. He said, well, not that I have seen. That was his testimony. It's denied that blanks in his relation to role playing are approved by FDLE. He tried to tell the jury it was just training. It's not accurate. This document, which is part of the very curriculum he said he is familiar with, which is the person that they called both of these witnesses. They called Angelini and then they called Mr. Sims. So this is their witness, no prejudice to them, that their witness testifies to his training and experience. They did not provide me, just so the court knows it. I don't think I have every piece of curriculum and class and training that he's done. I had a CV from him. And so I'm certainly not saying that they've done something wrong by not giving me all the things. But if I've learned in the course of this that he denies something that I know to exist, and now I have it today, which I didn't have it yesterday because I didn't know it was going to be an issue, nor did I know he was going to deny it. Because assuming it, and I didn't have it when I asked him the question. But he's here now. I made sure
Let me stop you. What are you intending to do with the manual?
I'm not going to introduce it to evidence. At this point, all I'm going to do is I'm going to say basically you explained that you were familiar with the manuals, this, that, and the other. You denied that you had seen anything as far as the role play. But you've reviewed all these things. I will approach and say, well, can you please take a look at this and tell me if you recognize this, and then I'm going to direct them to where it is. And I'll say, does that refresh your recollection as is the manual that it does say these things here? Of which I expect you to go, yes. And you confirm it does say blanks can be used in role play. That's all I'm going to do. So unless he denies that what I have is not the manual, which he can't, well, I guess he could, but it is, then if he's denied that, then in my case, then I will make whatever arrangements I need to make to address this.
Steve?
First of all, Mr. Sins did not say he was reviewing the firearms manuals for 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. I think he said he had reviewed the curriculums that are taught to the actual students, being the two books. I can't even remember what they're called at this point. And I don't believe at any time he says that FDLE does not permit the use of blanks during role playing. I have no idea what this is. It's not authenticated at this point. The state is objecting to it.
Well, at this point, I don't find that there's a discovery violation. It's an FDLE firearms manual that's available to both sides. It's not being intended to go in. As far as my understanding of it, it's being intended to use to refresh his recollection, which my understanding is pretty much anything can be used to refresh somebody's recollection. His testimony, per my recollection, was that he reviewed, again, I agree, curriculum. However, defense counsel did question about the particular manual. So I think the questioning, and his answer was, I'm not aware of it, of reading it about role play. So I think it becomes relevant. I don't think that using it, admitting it into evidence is appropriate. I will leave it up to you all whether it's appropriate for recross or whether he needs to do it in the defense case in chief. But I do not find a Richardson violation at this point, and I do find that it would be appropriate impeachment. Is there anything further we need to address before lunch?
So when we come back after lunch, is Mr. Sims taking the stand, or is he going to...
I'll let you all decide. I mean, I agree if you want to make an objection that it's not appropriate, it's beyond the scope of your redirect, I absolutely agree. Based on what you indicated his time period is, if you want to just do it, I'll leave that up to you. So if you all agree, whatever you want to do, just let me know when we're done. Oh, they're gone. I'm not bringing them back in. All right, the court is in recess until 1:10 after 1.
All rise, court is in recess.